Dave Kajganich, you wrote the screenplay for the coming-of-age cannibal love story Bones and All, based on the novel by Camille DeAngelis. So first off, what did you think about that book when you first read it?
Well, it really caught me off guard. It was submitted to me by a producer I'd never met who had said, "I really thought of you when I read this book." And so it's always very interesting to see how people pair you up with stories. And when I started reading it, I was really surprised to learn that what I had been considered the right fit for was this cannibal love story, but also a coming of age story of a young woman. And I had a blast reading the book because it is such a wild blend of genres, and it's just very astute about, in a very kind of fresh and open-hearted way about, what it means to be sort of, an other in some respect, how you're treated, what's expected of you, what you end up expecting of yourself, how you fight back from being marginalized. There was a lot that interested me about the book. And I had some kind of foundational conversations with the author of the novel, Camille, and the producer to make sure that I really was the best fit for it. Because even though this novel is about cannibals kind of on the road and in love, it did feel like a personal book to me. So I just wanted to make sure the author was not just permissive of my doing it or a man doing it, but excited about what I could bring to it. And so those conversations were lovely. And then I was off and running.
And one of the interesting things about the story, in the film, is how it's balancing so many different kinds of tones. It's got the really dark elements, but it also has some kind of macabre humor to it. And of course, there's the romance at the heart of it. How difficult is that to balance in a script when you have all of those different kind of elements?
Well, of course, it's a challenge. And when I work with Luca, it's the third time I've written a project for him. It's always this nest of different tones, sometimes competing tones. And, what I love about that, it allows you to tell your story through a number of different grammars. I mean, there's a horror grammar in this film. Obviously, there's a romance, sort of a young romance grammar. There's a road movie grammar. And all of these grammars sort of have different rules of how to use the image and how to use pacing or how to use anxiety, tension, things like that. And I just get a lot out of the intellectual challenge and the emotional challenge of fitting them together so that scenes are playing on different fields at the same time. In this film, you might start a scene in the love story grammar and end the scene in the horror grammar, or the reverse, or you might, sort of mix them into some strange new tone. There are a couple of moments in this film that really, I'm not sure I could even describe how they make me feel. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I feel really grateful to be working on projects that are complicated like this one was.
And you've worked in the horror genre before, as you mentioned. Is it a particular genre that you're drawn to, or is it just sort of something that's happened where the projects that have come your way have been?
Well, I grew up in the 80s, the advent of like bad cable television. So I watched a lot of horror movies growing up, and I loved them because they were cathartic, obviously, and they sort of over amplify emotion in an interesting way. And when I grew up sort of a teenager in rural Ohio. I was gay. I was in the closet. I was sort of worried about how I was going to fit into the world. Seeing those kinds of anxieties, or any kind of sort of anxiety amplified, is really gratifying, and it's really cathartic. And so I think when I started my career, I necessarily sort of gravitated to horror because I felt like I had learned so much from kind of emotionally about myself and about the world from watching horror movies. So it was only natural to sort of want to try to pick that up as a genre to write in.
And you mentioned the different sort of grammars of different genres. Besides obviously the book, were there other kind of films or shows or references that you were inspired by when telling this particular story?
Well, I looked at a lot of road movies because I knew that grammar is particularly difficult. I mean, writing a road story that really feels like a road trip feels is difficult because those actual journeys are full of sort of red herrings and dead ends and redundancy and periods of torpor and boredom. And in order to have something on the screen feel like an actual road film, you have to have those ingredients in it as well, which are risky if you're trying to tell, a sort of an efficient, brisk story. So that was one thing I wanted to school myself in quite a lot before I started writing the film, was to get the pace of a tone, the tone poem that a road trip really is, without a structure that's necessarily reassuring.
And yeah, as you mentioned, you've worked a few times with Luca Guadagnino, and working with him again on this film. What is that collaboration like? Because the films you've worked on with him are incredibly different from each other, like A Bigger Splash, Suspiria, and now this. What's that experience like?
I feel like our relationship a bit is like kids at a slumber party, sort of daring one another to do weird things. Every time we talk about what we might do next, it always just gets stranger and more interesting or more unexpected. So when he calls, I'm always prepared for to be invited to think about some crazy thing that I would never have sort of suggested for myself. But I do the same to him when I turn in these scripts. I put things in there that I really think are going to be interesting and difficult to direct, just to see what he does with them. And we just have a lot of fun with each other, sort of poking one another and daring one another to do weird new things.
And one of the most interesting standout characters in the film is Sully, played by Mark Rylance. And there's a character who's at the intersection of a lot of these different tones in the film, the horrific and the comedic and the sinister and all of that. Was that character especially difficult to write, or was it maybe the most fun character to write? Like, how do you approach a character that out there?
Well, I wouldn't say he was the most fun to write, because I find him so disturbing and also violent, and not, I don't mean in a literal way, although he is violent in a literal way. I mean, he is so disorganized in terms of a personality and a way of relating to the world. It was really, there's a lot of pathos to that character, because he has gone so long in his life without substantial human relationships. He doesn't even know what they are anymore. He doesn't know how to have them. He doesn't know how to form them, how to maintain them. And so when he bonds early in the film with the protagonist of the film, Marin, he doesn't know if he wants to be her father or her lover or her friend. And it's so confused in his mind that every scene just sort of escalates this disorganization. And I just found it really upsetting to write that character. And Mark on set would not step out of character. So he spoke in that accent and with that nervous system all the time, like craft services, standing in line for the restroom. He was always Sully, which made it even more upsetting, but a lot of fun. His performance is extraordinary.
And there's so many different characters who make appearances in the film. Being a road film, you have characters who come in for like a scene or two and make a really strong impression. How do you sort of encapsulate a character and give them this kind of full life in a brief time?
I think you can't write those scenes for the audience. I think you have to forget that the audience is even there, in the sense that I try to take a really naturalistic approach and not have lines of dialogue coming out of characters' mouths that are meant to educate an audience. And what that means, if you stop doing that, then the naturalistic dialogue can take its place and be full of details, half details, strange amalgams of references that you don't understand, things like that make a person on screen feel like a person that you're not being invited to know, but you're being, or understand, but you're being invited to observe. And I think once you think of it that way, you can really build quite a lot of specificity into characters, knowing that the audience will find them peculiar, maybe confusing in some respect. But this is how we feel about people that we overhear on the bus, do you know what I mean? Or sort of overhear in a movie theater. We don't know anything about them except the very few things we're being given. So as long as those few things are highly specific and seem sincere, I think that takes care of it.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the film, and as people get to see it, look forward to what everyone thinks of this incredibly unique film. So thank you so much for talking to me about it.
Thank you very much.